March 15th, 1944. Norfick Naval Shipyard, Virginia. The rejection letter crumpled in Chief Petty Officer Eugene Morrison's calloused hands as he stood among the towering cranes and bustling activity of America's largest naval facility. His idea, dismissed as impractical by 3 separate Navy bureaus, lay forgotten in a Manila folder marked "Not Feasible." What those bureaucrats didn't understand was that Morrison's rejected concept would soon become the difference between victory and catastrophe in the Pacific, as kamikaze attacks reached their terrifying peak, claiming hundreds of American ships and thousands of lives. One mechanic's stubborn refusal to accept defeat would revolutionize naval warfare forever. The mathematics of destruction were already being written in blood across the Pacific. Japanese fanaticism, suicide pilots, driven by desperate, had transformed their aircraft into guided missiles of unprecedented lethality. American radar operators watched helplessly as blips on their screens disappeared into the hulls of destroyers, cruisers, and aircraft carriers. The traditional methods of fleet defense, developed over decades of conventional warfare, were proving catastrophically inadequate against an enemy willing to die for a single hit. Morrison had witnessed this transformation firsthand during his deployment aboard the USS Franklin in late 1943. The veteran machinist, who had spent 22 years maintaining naval equipment from battleship engine rooms to destroyer workshops, possessed an intimate understanding of mechanical systems that few officers could match. While admirals debated strategy in comfortable conference rooms, Morrison worked elbow-deep in the machinery that kept America's fleet operational. His hands bore the scars of countless repairs. His mind catalogued the weaknesses of every system he'd ever touched. The idea had come to him during a particularly brutal night watch in December 1943. The Franklin was conducting operations near the Marshall Islands when Japanese bombers appeared on the horizon. Morrison watched from his battle station as the ship's anti-aircraft guns opened fire, their shells bursting in seemingly random patterns across the sky. The gunners, skilled as they were, struggled to track fast-moving targets while manually operating their weapons. Too many rounds missed their marks. Too many enemy aircraft broke through the defensive screen. Standing there in the vibrating steel belly of the carrier, surrounded by the thunder of defensive fire and the acrid smell of cordite, Morrison realized something profound. The problem wasn't the guns themselves. American weapons were among the finest in the world, manufactured with precision that German and Japanese factories couldn't match. The issue wasn't ammunition either. American industrial capacity produced shells in quantities that staggered enemy observers. The fundamental weakness lay in the connection between detection and destruction, between seeing the target and hitting it. Morrison's background gave him a unique perspective on this challenge. Before the war, he had worked as a civilian contractor at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, where he'd helped install some of the first radar systems on American warships. He understood both the incredible potential of electronic detection and its current limitations in fire control. Radar could see approaching aircraft at distances that human eyes could never achieve. But that information traveled through a cumbersome chain of voice communications and manual calculations before reaching the gun crews. The mechanic began sketching his concept during off-duty hours, working by lamplight in cramped quarters while the Franklin steamed through hostile waters. His idea centered on a direct electronic connection between radar detection and gun control. Instead of relying on human operators to manually track targets and adjust firing solutions, Morrison envisioned a system where radar data would automatically guide anti-aircraft weapons to their targets. The guns would track aircraft with mechanical precision, maintaining accurate aim, even as targets maneuvered at high speed. The technical challenges were immense. Existing radar systems provided bearing and distance information, but translating that data into precise gun control required complex calculations performed in real time. The mechanical components needed to move heavy gun mounts with both speed and accuracy didn't exist in any current design. Most daunting of all, the entire system would need to function reliably in the harsh environment of naval combat, where salt spray, vibration, and battle damage could destroy delicate electronics. Morrison's first formal proposal, submitted through proper Navy channels in January 1944, disappeared into the bureaucratic maze of wartime administration. Weeks passed without response. When he finally received acknowledgement, it came in the form of a polite but dismissive letter from the Bureau of Ordnance. His concept was deemed technically unfeasible and beyond current manufacturing capabilities. The rejection stung, but Morrison had expected skepticism from officers who understood policy better than machinery. Undeterred, he refined his proposal and submitted it to the Bureau of Ships. This time, the response came more quickly, but the message remained the same. Navy engineers, already overwhelmed with urgent production demands, couldn't spare resources for experimental projects. Morrison's idea joined thousands of other suggestions in filing cabinets across Washington, catalogued and forgotten by administrators focused on immediate needs rather than revolutionary possibilities. The third rejection, from the Office of Naval Research, arrived on the same day Morrison learned of his transfer back to Norfick Naval Shipyard. The timing seemed cruelly ironic. Just as the Navy was sending him to one of its most advanced facilities, his innovative concept was being dismissed as impossible. The letter cited insufficient priority and resource constraints as reasons for denial. Between the lines, Morrison read a more fundamental message. The Navy wasn't interested in radical changes to proven systems, especially ideas originating from enlisted personnel rather than commissioned officers. Norfick Naval Shipyard, in March 1944, represented American industrial might at its absolute peak. The facility sprawled across 3,400 acres of Virginia waterfront, its dozens of dry docks simultaneously servicing some of the most powerful warships ever built. Massive cranes lifted entire gun turrets with casual efficiency. Welding arcs flickered like stars across the hulls of destroyers and cruisers undergoing battle damage repairs. The constant noise of construction and reconstruction created a symphony of American determination that could be heard for miles. Morrison reported to Shop 51, the facility's electronics repair division, where damaged radar and communication equipment received expert attention from some of the Navy's most skilled technicians. The assignment should have been routine for someone of his experience. Instead, it provided him with unprecedented access to the cutting-edge technology he needed to prove his concept could work. The shop's inventory included radar components from every major American manufacturer, communication systems of all types, and experimental equipment that wouldn't reach fleet units for months. His supervisor, Lieutenant Commander Harold Becker, was a Naval Academy graduate with an engineering degree from MIT, unlike the distant bureaucrats who had rejected Morrison's proposals. Becker possessed both the technical knowledge to understand complex systems and the practical experience to recognize innovative solutions. Their first meeting, conducted in the cluttered office overlooking the shop floor, would prove more significant than either man initially realized. Morrison had learned caution from his previous rejections. Instead of immediately presenting his grand vision for automated gun control, he began with smaller suggestions for improving existing systems. He proposed modifications to radar maintenance procedures that would increase accuracy and reduce downtime. He suggested changes to communication protocols that would speed the flow of information between detection and engagement teams. Each recommendation demonstrated his deep understanding of both electronics and combat operations. Becker, initially skeptical of suggestions from an enlisted man, gradually recognized Morrison's exceptional expertise. The mechanic's ability to diagnose complex electronic failures exceeded that of many officers with formal engineering training. His insights into practical problems reflected years of hands-on experience that no classroom could provide. When Morrison finally revealed his concept for automated fire control, Becker was prepared to listen seriously. The presentation took place on a rainy April evening in the shop's test laboratory. Morrison had prepared carefully, gathering components from the facility's extensive inventory to demonstrate key principles of his design. He began with a simple radar display, showing how electronic signals could be converted into mechanical motion. Using a modified gun mount salvaged from a damaged destroyer, he demonstrated how precise servo motors could translate electrical commands into accurate weapon positioning. The demonstration wasn't perfect. The makeshift components didn't always respond smoothly, and the calculations required constant manual adjustment. But the fundamental concept worked. Radar data could control gun movement with speed and precision that human operators couldn't match. The system maintained accurate tracking, even when targets changed course abruptly, a capability that would prove crucial against kamikaze attacks. Becker watched in fascination as Morrison's improvised system tracked a simulated aircraft across the laboratory ceiling. The gun mount, responding to electronic commands derived from radar data, followed the target with mechanical persistence that never wavered. When the target suddenly changed direction, the system adjusted instantaneously, maintaining perfect alignment. The implications were staggering. If such technology could be perfected and mass-produced, American ships might finally possess effective defense against suicide attacks. The lieutenant commander's enthusiasm grew as Morrison explained the system's potential applications. Beyond anti-aircraft defense, automated fire control could revolutionize naval gunnery in all its forms. Surface engagements could be conducted at greater ranges with unprecedented accuracy. Shore bombardments could achieve precision that would minimize civilian casualties while maximizing military effectiveness. The technology represented nothing less than a complete transformation of naval warfare. But enthusiasm alone wouldn't overcome the institutional obstacles that had already defeated Morrison's proposals 3 times. The Navy's procurement system, designed for mass production of proven designs, struggled to accommodate revolutionary innovations from unexpected sources. Officers who had built their careers on existing technologies were naturally resistant to changes that might render their expertise obsolete. Most critically, the urgent demands of ongoing combat operations left little room for experimental projects that might not produce results for months or years. Becker understood these challenges better than Morrison could. As an academy graduate with connections throughout the Navy's technical establishment, he possessed the bureaucratic skills necessary to navigate institutional resistance. His strategy focused on demonstrating immediate practical benefits rather than long-term revolutionary potential. Instead of proposing a complete overhaul of naval gunnery, he would present Morrison's concept as an incremental improvement to existing systems. The approach required careful preparation and precise timing. Becker began by documenting the growing threat posed by Japanese suicide attacks, using official casualty reports and damage assessments to build an irrefutable case for improved defensive capabilities. He gathered technical specifications for all current anti-aircraft systems, identifying specific weaknesses that Morrison's innovation could address. Most importantly, he cultivated relationships with officers who possessed both the authority to approve experimental projects and the technical knowledge to understand their potential. Meanwhile, Morrison continued refining his prototype system in the Norfolk shop's laboratory. Each test revealed new challenges and opportunities for improvement. The servo motors needed more precise control mechanisms to handle the weight and inertia of full-sized gun mounts. The radar interface required sophisticated filtering to eliminate false signals that could send weapons tracking in random directions. The entire system demanded electrical power supplies that could function reliably despite the voltage fluctuations common aboard warships during combat. These technical obstacles, while significant, paled beside the challenge of proving the system's effectiveness under actual combat conditions. Laboratory tests could demonstrate basic functionality, but naval warfare presented variables that no simulation could fully replicate. Salt spray that corroded electrical connections, shock waves from nearby explosions that could disrupt delicate electronics, and battle damage that might disable critical components at the worst possible moment. Morrison's solution was characteristically practical. Rather than attempting to perfect the system in isolation, he proposed installing a prototype aboard an operational warship for field testing. The approach carried obvious risks. If the experimental equipment failed during combat, it could compromise the ship's defensive capabilities at a critical moment. But if it succeeded, the demonstration would provide irrefutable proof of the concept's military value. The proposal reached Becker's desk on May 1st, 1944, as reports from the Pacific Theater painted an increasingly dire picture of kamikaze effectiveness. Japanese suicide pilots were achieving hit rates that conventional bombing had never approached, sinking or severely damaging American vessels with terrifying regularity. The psychological impact on fleet personnel was becoming almost as serious as the physical destruction. Sailors who had faced enemy fire with confidence now watched the skies with barely controlled fear. knowing that any approaching aircraft might be piloted by someone willing to die for a single successful attack. The timing of Morrison's proposal could not have been more fortuitous. That same week, Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, received a classified report that would fundamentally alter the Navy's priorities. The document, compiled by the Office of Naval Intelligence, contained casualty statistics that painted a chilling picture of Japanese tactical evolution. Between October 1944 and April 1945, kamikaze attacks had sunk or damaged over 300 American vessels, killing more than 4,900 sailors and wounding nearly 5,000 more. The numbers represented a casualty rate that exceeded anything the Navy had experienced since the early days of the Pacific War. What made these statistics particularly alarming was their trajectory. Japanese pilots were becoming more effective with each passing month, not less. Early kamikaze attacks had been largely improvised affairs. Desperate pilots in obsolete aircraft making suicidal runs against heavily defended targets. By spring 1944, the enemy had systematized their approach. Special attack units trained specifically for suicide missions, flying aircraft modified for maximum destructive impact. They studied American defensive patterns, identified weaknesses in anti-aircraft coverage, and developed tactics that exploited gaps in traditional fire control methods. The psychological dimension of the threat was equally troubling. American sailors, accustomed to facing enemies who sought to survive their attacks, struggled to adapt to opponents who treated death as victory. Traditional defensive thinking assumed that enemy pilots would break off attacks when faced with heavy anti-aircraft fire. Kamikaze pilots flew straight through defensive barrages, accepting hits that would have deterred conventional attackers. This fundamental shift in enemy behavior rendered decades of tactical doctrine obsolete overnight. Admiral William Halsey, commanding the Third Fleet, had witnessed this transformation firsthand during operations off the Philippines. His after-action reports, classified at the highest levels, described scenes that challenged everything American naval officers thought they understood about combat. Japanese pilots deliberately crashed damaged aircraft into American ships rather than attempting emergency landings. Others continued attacks even after sustaining wounds that should have been immediately fatal. The traditional calculus of naval warfare, based on rational actors seeking military objectives while preserving their own forces, had been completely overturned. The strategic implications extended far beyond immediate tactical concerns. American plans for the invasion of Japan, scheduled for late 1945, assumed the ability to establish and maintain naval supremacy in Japanese home waters. If kamikaze attacks continued to exact such devastating tolls on American vessels, the fundamental assumptions underlying Operation Downfall would need complete revision. The Navy faced the possibility that suicide tactics might render close support of amphibious operations prohibitively expensive in terms of ships and lives. Against this backdrop of mounting crisis, Becker's carefully crafted proposal found receptive audiences throughout the Navy's technical hierarchy. His presentation to Captain James Russell, Norfolk's commanding officer, emphasized the immediate practical benefits of automated fire control rather than its revolutionary implications. The system would increase the accuracy of existing design or crew training. most weapons without requiring fundamental changes to ship importantly. It could be tested and refined without disrupting ongoing combat operations. Captain Russell, a career surface warfare officer who had commanded destroyers in both the Atlantic and Pacific theaters, possessed intimate knowledge of anti-aircraft combat's brutal realities. He had watched helplessly as Japanese aircraft penetrated defensive screens that should have been impenetrable. He had seen skilled gunners miss targets that seemed impossible to miss, their manual tracking systems unable to match the speed and unpredictability of modern aerial attacks. Morrison's concept offered hope for solving problems that Russell had considered unsolvable. The captain's endorsement carried weight throughout the Navy's technical establishment. Russell's reputation for practical judgment and combat effectiveness made his recommendations particularly valuable to officers responsible for approving experimental projects. When he forwarded Becker's proposal to the Bureau of Ships with a personal recommendation for immediate testing, it received serious consideration that Morrison's earlier submissions had never achieved. The breakthrough came during a meeting at the Navy Department in Washington on May 15, 1944. Present were representatives from the Bureau of Ships, the Bureau of Ordnance, and the Office of Naval Research, the same organizations that had previously rejected Morrison's proposals. This time, however, the presentation focused on combat effectiveness rather than technical innovation. Becker shared comprehensive analysis of recent calmed prepared kamikaze attacks, identifying specific instances where automated fire control might have prevented successful enemy strikes. The USS Bunker Hill incident provided a particularly compelling case study. On May 11th, just 4 days before the Washington meeting, 2 kamikaze aircraft had penetrated the carrier's defensive screen in broad daylight, causing massive casualties and forcing the ship out of action. Analysis of the attack revealed that manual gun control systems had been unable to track the Japanese aircraft during their final approach runs. The pilots had exploited the brief intervals when American gunners lost visual contact, using cloud cover and sun angles to mask their movements until the final seconds before impact. Automated fire control, Becker argued, would have eliminated these tracking gaps. Radar-guided weapons would have maintained continuous contact with the attacking aircraft, regardless of visibility conditions. The system's mechanical precision would have ensured accurate fire throughout the engagement, potentially destroying both kamikazes before they reached their target. The Bunker Hill's casualties, 346 dead and 264 wounded, might have been completely avoided. Similar analysis of other recent attacks revealed a consistent pattern. Japanese pilots were successfully exploiting the limitations of human-operated defensive systems. They approached from angles that made visual tracking difficult. They used evasive maneuvers that confused manual gun control. Most critically, they maintained their attacks through defensive fire that would have deterred conventional pilots. Knowing that American gunners needed continuous visual contact to maintain accuracy, the assembled officers, many of whom had personal experience with kamikaze attacks, recognized the validity of Becker's analysis. The technical challenges involved in developing automated fire control remained significant, but the potential benefits clearly justified the risks and costs of experimental development. For the first time since Morrison had conceived his idea, institutional resistance began to crack under the weight of military necessity. The formal authorization came in the form of a classified directive signed by Admiral King himself. Project Able, as the experimental program was designated, would receive priority funding and personnel support from all relevant Navy bureaus. Norfick Naval Shipyard would serve as the primary development facility, with Morrison's Shop 51 team expanded to include electronics specialists, mechanical engineers, and combat systems experts from throughout the naval establishment. The directive's language was carefully crafted to emphasize practical development rather than revolutionary innovation. The Navy was not abandoning proven defensive systems in favor of untested technology. Instead, it was systematically exploring improvements that might enhance the effectiveness of existing weapons. This cautious approach reflected institutional wisdom gained through decades of military procurement disasters, projects that promised miraculous capabilities but delivered expensive failures. Morrison learned of Project Able's approval through Becker, who delivered the news in the same laboratory where they had conducted their first successful demonstration. The mechanic's reaction was characteristically understated. 22 years of naval service had taught him that official approval was merely the beginning of any complex undertaking. The real work of transforming an experimental concept into operational reality would require months of intensive development, testing, and refinement. The expanded team assembled at Norfolk during the final weeks of May 1944 represented some of the finest technical talent available to the American military. Dr. Richard Pemberton, a physicist from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, brought expertise in radar signal processing that would prove crucial to developing reliable target tracking algorithms. Commander William Hayes, a Naval Academy graduate with extensive experience in fire control systems, provided the practical knowledge necessary to integrate new technology with existing ship designs. Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Chen, transferred from the Pacific Fleet specifically for Project Able, contributed combat experience that laboratory testing could never replicate. Chen had served aboard the USS Enterprise during some of the war's most intense carrier battles, witnessing firsthand both the effectiveness of determined Japanese attacks and the limitations of current American defensive systems. His insights into the practical requirements of shipboard combat would prove invaluable in developing systems that could function reliably under the extreme conditions of naval warfare. The technical challenges facing the team were more complex than Morrison's original conception had suggested. Creating a direct electronic link between radar detection and gun control required solving problems at the cutting edge of 1940s technology. Vacuum tube computers capable of performing the necessary calculations in real time were still experimental devices, unreliable and enormously expensive. Servo motors powerful enough to move heavy gun mounts with precision didn't exist in any current design. Most fundamentally, the entire system needed to function aboard warships, where electrical interference, mechanical vibration, and battle damage created an environment hostile to delicate electronics. The solution emerged through systematic analysis of each component's requirements and capabilities. Rather than attempting to create a single integrated system, the team decided to develop modular components that could be combined in various configurations depending on specific ship characteristics and mission requirements. This approach would allow for easier testing and modification while providing flexibility in operational deployment. The radar interface proved to be the most technically demanding component. Standard shipboard radar systems provided accurate bearing and distance information, but extracting that data in a form suitable for automatic gun control required sophisticated signal processing. The team developed custom electronic circuits that could filter radar returns, identify genuine targets among false signals, and predict future target positions based on current movement patterns. The mechanical components presented different but equally significant challenges. Moving a multi-ton gun mount with the speed and precision necessary to track fast-moving aircraft required servo systems far more powerful than anything previously installed aboard warships. The motors needed to operate reliably despite the salt spray, temperature extremes, and shock loads endemic to naval combat. Most critically, they had to fail safely, allowing manual control to resume immediately if the automated system was damaged or disabled. Testing began in controlled conditions, using decommissioned equipment in Norfolk's secure testing facility. The team constructed a full-scale mock-up of a destroyer's anti-aircraft gun mount, complete with realistic and mechanical loading radar input systems. Initial trials revealed problems that no amount of theoretical analysis could have predicted. The servo motors, designed to specifications that seemed adequate on paper, struggled with the complex vibrations generated by simulating gunfire. Electronic circuits that functioned perfectly in laboratory conditions failed when subjected to the electrical interference created by multiple operating systems. Morrison approached each failure as a learning opportunity rather than a setback. His decades of experience maintaining naval equipment had taught him that complex mechanical systems always behaved differently in practice than in design specifications. The key was systematic identification and correction of problems, rather than abandoning concepts at the first sign of difficulty. Each component failure provided data that informed subsequent modifications, gradually building toward a system that could meet the demanding requirements of naval combat. The breakthrough came during a late-night testing session in early June 1944. Morrison and Dr. Pemberton had been struggling with signal processing algorithms that consistently lost track of targets during simulated evasive maneuvers. The radar returns, translated into electrical signals, contained subtle variations that confused the tracking circuits. Conventional approaches focused on filtering out these variations, treating them as unwanted noise that interfered with accurate target identification. Morrison's insight reversed this conventional thinking. Instead of eliminating signal variations, he proposed using them as additional information about target behavior. The subtle changes in radar returns actually contained data about aircraft speed, heading, and maneuvering characteristics. By analyzing these patterns rather than filtering them out, the tracking system could predict target movements with unprecedented accuracy. The modified algorithms performed dramatically better in subsequent tests. The system maintained accurate tracking, even when simulated targets executed violent evasive maneuvers designed to break conventional radar locks. Most importantly, it demonstrated the ability to engage multiple targets simultaneously, a capability that would prove crucial against coordinated kamikaze attacks, involving several aircraft approaching from different directions. Word of these successes reached the highest levels of naval command through carefully managed demonstration programs. Admiral King himself witnessed a classified test at Norfolk on June 20th, 1944. Observing as the prototype system engaged 6 simultaneous targets with accuracy that human operators could never achieve. The demonstration lasted less than 10 minutes, but its implications were immediately apparent to an officer who had spent his career evaluating military technologies. The Admiral's endorsement accelerated development timelines throughout the Navy's technical establishment. Resources that had been allocated to other projects were quietly redirected to support Project Able. Manufacturing facilities received priority orders for specialized components. Most significantly, the program received authorization to begin installation testing aboard operational warships, the crucial step between laboratory success and fleet deployment. The USS Cassin Young, a Fletcher-class destroyer undergoing routine maintenance at Norfolk, became the first vessel to receive experimental fire control equipment. The installation process revealed new categories of technical challenges that land-based testing had never encountered. Shipboard electrical systems operated under conditions that stressed every component to its limits. Space constraints forced creative solutions for mounting equipment that had been designed with laboratory dimensions in mind. Most critically, the entire system needed to integrate seamlessly with existing combat systems without compromising the ship's operational capabilities. Commander David Walsh, the Cassin Young's captain, had initially resisted his vessel's selection for experimental testing. His crew had already mastered their existing defensive systems through months of combat experience in the Pacific. Installing untested equipment seemed like an unnecessary risk that might compromise their effectiveness during future operations. Morrison's patient explanation of the system's capabilities gradually overcame this resistance, particularly when the mechanic demonstrated how automated fire control could be instantly disabled if problems developed. The first shipboard tests took place in Chesapeake Bay during July 1944, with the Cassin Young conducting simulated anti-aircraft exercises against drone targets. The results exceeded even Morrison's optimistic expectations. The automated system achieved hit rates of over 90% against targets that human gunners typically engaged with less than 40% accuracy. More importantly, it maintained this performance level during extended exercises, showing none of the fatigue effects that degraded human operator effectiveness over time. The combat evaluation came sooner than anyone anticipated. The Cassin Young received emergency orders to join Task Force 38 in the Western Pacific, where Admiral Halsey was preparing for operations against Japanese strongholds in the Philippines. The destroyer's experimental fire control system would face its ultimate test against the enemy pilots who had inspired its development. The voyage across the Pacific provided additional opportunities for system refinement and crew training. Morrison sailed with the ship as a technical observer, making continuous adjustments to optimize performance under actual operating conditions. The crew's initial skepticism about automated weapons gradually transformed into enthusiasm as they observed the system's consistent accuracy and reliability. Chief Gunner's Mate Thomas Rodriguez, responsible for the ship's anti-aircraft battery, became one of the system's strongest advocates after witnessing its performance during practice exercises. The first combat test occurred on October 12, 1944, during air operations over Formosa. Japanese aircraft, including several identified as potential kamikaze attackers, approached the task force in coordinated groups designed to overwhelm defensive systems through sheer numbers. Traditional tactics called for manual gun control, with experienced gunners selecting individual targets based on threat assessment and engagement opportunities. The Casin-Young's automated system responded differently. Instead of concentrating fire on single targets, it distributed accurate fire across multiple aircraft simultaneously. The mechanical precision of radar-guided guns enabled engagement patterns that human operators could never coordinate. Multiple targets were tracked and engaged with split-second timing that maximized defensive effectiveness while conserving ammunition. The results were immediately apparent to observers throughout the task force. The Casin-Young's defensive fire was noticeably more accurate and sustained than comparable vessels using manual systems. Aircraft that might have penetrated traditional defensive screens were destroyed at ranges that provided comfortable safety margins. Most significantly, the system maintained peak performance throughout extended engagements, showing none of the degradation associated with crew fatigue. Admiral Halsey's after-action report, transmitted to Washington on October 15th, contained language that would accelerate Project Able's transition from experimental program to fleet-wide deployment. The automated fire control system had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded all previous performance standards. Its ability to engage multiple targets with sustained accuracy represented a fundamental breakthrough in naval defensive technology. Most importantly, it offered realistic hope for countering the kamikaze threat that had been devastating American forces. The report's impact on Navy procurement priorities was immediate and dramatic. Manufacturing contracts were expedited for components that had previously been considered experimental curiosities. Training programs were established to prepare crews for equipment that would transform their approach to combat. Most significantly, Admiral King authorized installation of automated fire control systems aboard every major combatant vessel in the Pacific Fleet, a commitment that would require unprecedented coordination between technical and operational commands. Morrison's role in this transformation remained largely invisible to outside observers. Military protocol demanded that credit for technical innovations flow through official channels rather than focusing on individual contributors. The mechanic's name appeared in classified technical reports, but not in the press releases that announced new defensive capabilities to the American public. This anonymity suited Morrison perfectly. His satisfaction came from watching his concept save lives rather than from public recognition. The system's effectiveness became undeniable during subsequent operations. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, fought in late October 1944, provided the most comprehensive test of automated fire control under intense combat conditions. Japanese forces committed their remaining carrier aircraft and land-based squadrons to preventing American success in the Philippines, creating aerial battles of unprecedented intensity. Ships equipped with Morrison's fire control system consistently outperformed vessels using traditional manual methods. The USS Kidd, another destroyer fitted with experimental equipment, shot down 13 Japanese aircraft during a single engagement without sustaining any hits. The USS Hazelwood achieved similar results, its automated guns destroying multiple kamikaze attackers before they could approach within effective range. These successes came at a crucial moment in the Pacific War. American forces were preparing for operations that would bring them within range of Japan's home islands, where kamikaze attacks were expected to reach maximum intensity. The availability of effective defensive technology would prove decisive in determining whether such operations remained feasible despite expected casualties. The psychological impact on American crews was as significant as the tactical advantages. Sailors who had faced kamikaze attacks with barely controlled fear now possessed confidence in their defensive capabilities. The knowledge that their ships carried weapons systems capable of defeating suicide attackers restored morale that had been steadily eroding under the strain of facing enemies willing to die for single successful strikes. Japanese intelligence services gradually recognized that American defensive capabilities had undergone fundamental changes. Pilot debriefings from survivors of failed attacks consistently reported encountering anti-aircraft fire of unprecedented accuracy and intensity. Aircraft that should have been able to penetrate defensive screens were being destroyed at ranges that traditional weapons couldn't achieve. The implications were clear to enemy commanders who understood the technical requirements of effective air defense. By December 1944, Project Able had evolved from an experimental program into the foundation of American naval air defense doctrine. Every major combatant vessel in the Pacific Fleet either carried automated fire control systems or was scheduled for installation during the next available maintenance period. Training programs had prepared thousands of sailors to operate and maintain equipment that represented the cutting edge of military technology. The transformation was so complete that younger sailors assumed automated fire control had always been standard equipment. They couldn't imagine conducting anti-aircraft operations using the manual methods that had been universal just months earlier. Morrison's innovation had become so thoroughly integrated into naval operations that its revolutionary nature was already being forgotten by those who used it daily. Production statistics reflected the system's strategic importance. American factories were manufacturing fire control equipment at rates that would have seemed impossible during the program's experimental phase. The components required precision manufacturing techniques that pushed industrial capabilities to their limits. Yet production lines were meeting delivery schedules that supported the Navy's ambitious installation timeline. The success created new challenges that Morrison hadn't anticipated during the system's development. Maintaining sophisticated electronic equipment under combat conditions required technical expertise that many ships lacked. Spare parts had to be distributed throughout the Pacific Fleet in quantities sufficient to support continuous operations thousands of miles from manufacturing facilities. Most critically, the system's complexity made it vulnerable to battle damage that might disable defensive capabilities at crucial moments. These problems demanded solutions that extended far beyond the original scope of Project Able. The Navy established specialized technical schools to train maintenance personnel in electronic systems theory and practical repair techniques. Mobile repair ships were equipped with sophisticated workshops capable of rebuilding damaged fire control equipment at forward bases. Standardized troubleshooting procedures were developed to help shipboard technicians diagnose and correct common problems without specialized test equipment. Morrison found himself at the center of this expanding technical infrastructure, his expertise in demand throughout the Pacific Fleet. Ships experiencing problems with their fire control systems specifically requested his assistance, knowing that the system's original developer possessed insights that no amount of technical documentation could convey. His reputation among fleet personnel grew to legendary proportions, though his name remained unknown to the general public. The system's effectiveness continued to improve as operational experience revealed opportunities for refinement. Software modifications increased tracking accuracy under specific conditions. Hardware improvements enhanced reliability in the corrosive environment of ocean operations. Most importantly, tactical doctrine evolved to maximize the advantages that automated fire control provided while minimizing vulnerabilities that enemy forces might exploit. The real test of Morrison's innovation would come with the bloodiest campaign of the Pacific War. As American forces prepared for the invasion of Okinawa in early 1945, intelligence estimates painted a terrifying picture of what lay ahead. Japanese commanders had concentrated over 4,000 aircraft on the home islands and surrounding territories, with the majority designated for kamikaze missions. The scale of suicide attacks planned for Operation Iceberg dwarfed anything previously encountered. American naval forces would face an aerial onslaught designed to sink or damage so many ships that the invasion itself would become impossible. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the Fifth Fleet, understood that traditional defensive measures would prove catastrophically inadequate against such overwhelming numbers. His task force included over 1,300 vessels of all types, from massive battleships to tiny patrol craft. Each ship represented a potential target for pilots who measured success not in survival but in destruction. The mathematics were brutally simple. If Japanese kamikaze units achieved even modest success rates, American losses would exceed anything experienced since Pearl Harbor. The fleet that assembled off Okinawa in March 1945 carried Morrison's fire control systems aboard every major combatant vessel. Destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and aircraft carriers all mounted the automated guns that had proven so effective during previous operations. But Okinawa would test these systems under conditions that no earlier battle had approximated. The Japanese planned coordinated mass attacks involving hundreds of aircraft simultaneously, formations designed to saturate defensive capabilities through sheer numbers. Morrison sailed with Task Force 58 aboard the USS Hornet, one of the newest Essex-class carriers in the Pacific Fleet. His presence wasn't officially required. The fire control systems had proven reliable enough to operate without constant supervision from their developer. But Admiral Mark Mitcher, commanding the task force's fast carriers, had personally requested Morrison's participation. The mechanic's ability to optimize system performance under combat conditions might prove decisive during the upcoming battle. The carrier's Combat Information Center became Morrison's primary workspace, surrounded by radar displays and communication equipment that revealed the full scope of Japanese preparations. Enemy aircraft were massing at airfields throughout southern Japan, their numbers growing daily as reinforcements arrived from training schools and operational units. Intelligence estimates suggested the Japanese possessed enough aircraft to sustain intensive kamikaze operations for weeks, possibly months. Captain Joseph Clark, the Hornet's commanding officer, had witnessed Morrison's system in action during previous operations. He understood both its capabilities and limitations better than most naval officers. The automated guns could engage multiple targets with unprecedented accuracy, but they consumed ammunition at rates that stressed logistical systems designed for more conservative firing patterns. Sustained combat would test not only the equipment's reliability, but the Navy's ability to maintain adequate supplies under intense operational pressure. The first major kamikaze assault began at dawn on April 6, 1945. Japanese commanders had designated this date for Operation Kikusui, the floating chrysanthemum, their largest coordinated attack since the war began. Over 400 aircraft participated in the initial wave, approaching the American fleet from multiple directions to complicate defensive responses. Traditional tactics assumed that such large formations would be detected early enough for combat air patrols to intercept them before they reached the ships. The Japanese had learned from previous failures. Instead of approaching in easily detected large formations, they split their forces into dozens of small groups that approached at different altitudes and headings. Some flew at wave-top level to avoid radar detection until the final moments before attack. Others climbed to maximum altitude, hoping to dive through defensive screens too quickly for manual gun control to track them effectively. Most ominously, many pilots had been briefed on American fire control capabilities and instructed to exploit any weaknesses they observed. Morrison watched the developing attack from the Hornet's radar plot, observing as dozens of enemy contacts appeared on screens throughout the Combat Information Center. The scale exceeded anything he had witnessed during system development or earlier combat operations. Traditional defensive doctrine would have been overwhelmed within minutes by the sheer number of simultaneous threats requiring engagement. Manual gun control simply couldn't coordinate responses against so many targets approaching from different directions. The automated fire control systems responded differently. Instead of attempting to prioritize targets based on human assessment of relative threats, they engaged aircraft based on mathematical calculations of interception, probability, and engagement timing. Guns throughout the task force began firing in coordinated patterns that maximized defensive coverage while avoiding fratricidal interference between adjacent ships. The mechanical precision of radar-guided weapons created interlocking fields of fire that no human operators could have coordinated. The USS Laffey, a destroyer positioned on the task force's perimeter, became the focal point for the morning's most intense action. 22 kamikaze aircraft identified the isolated vessel as an attractive target, concentrating their attacks in waves designed to overwhelm its defensive capabilities. Under traditional circumstances, such overwhelming numbers would have guaranteed the ship's destruction. manual gun crews might have engaged 4 or 5 attackers effectively before being overwhelmed by the remainder. Morrison's fire control systems transformed the engagement completely. The Laffey's automated guns tracked and engaged multiple targets simultaneously, maintaining accurate fire throughout the extended battle. Aircraft that penetrated the outer defensive zone encountered increasingly concentrated fire as they approached the ship. The system's ability to predict target movement patterns enabled engagement of maneuvering aircraft at ranges where human gunners would have struggled to maintain tracking. The results were immediately apparent to observers throughout the task force. The Laffey not only survived the concentrated attack, but shot down multiple attackers while sustaining only minor damage. Similar scenes played out aboard ships throughout the formation as automated defensive systems engaged kamikaze aircraft with effectiveness that exceeded all previous performance standards. The morning's action demonstrated that Morrison's innovation had fundamentally altered the balance between offensive and defensive capabilities in naval warfare. Japanese pilots, briefed to expect American defensive fire patterns based on earlier encounters, found themselves facing weapons that behaved in ways they hadn't anticipated. Aircraft approaching from angles that should have provided brief immunity from defensive fire encountered immediate, accurate engagement. Evasive maneuvers that had previously confused manual gun control proved ineffective against radar-guided weapons that maintained continuous tracking regardless of pilot actions. The psychological impact on attacking pilots became apparent through radio intercepts and prisoner interrogations. Japanese aircrew reported encountering defensive fire of unprecedented intensity and accuracy. Many pilots, expecting to penetrate American screens through speed and surprise, found themselves under attack from the moment they entered engagement range. The knowledge that defensive systems could track and engage them continuously, regardless of visibility conditions or evasive actions, undermined the confidence that had made earlier kamikaze attacks so effective. Admiral Ugaki Matomi, commanding Japanese kamikaze operations from his headquarters on Kyushu, recognized that American defensive capabilities had undergone fundamental changes. His intelligence staff reported consistent patterns of improved defensive effectiveness that couldn't be explained by traditional factors such as crew training or ammunition quality. The implications were troubling for Japanese strategy that depended on kamikaze attacks achieving sufficient success rates to make American operations prohibitively expensive. The technological advantage extended beyond individual ship defense to fleet-wide coordination. Morrison systems enabled defensive responses that treated the entire task force as a single integrated weapon system rather than a collection of individual vessels. Radar data shared between ships allowed coordinated engagement of threats approaching from any direction. Aircraft that evaded one ship's defensive fire encountered immediate engagement from adjacent vessels whose automated systems had been tracking the same targets. This coordination proved decisive during the second day of Operation Kikusui, when Japanese forces launched their most sophisticated attack of the war. Over 200 aircraft approached the American fleet in carefully coordinated waves, with each group assigned specific targets and approach routes designed to exploit perceived weaknesses in defensive coverage. The attack plan, based on months of intelligence gathering and tactical analysis, represented the pinnacle of Japanese kamikaze doctrine. The coordinated defensive response demonstrated capabilities that Japanese planners had never anticipated. As attacking aircraft entered the task force's engagement zone, automated fire control systems throughout the fleet began tracking and engaging targets based on real-time data sharing between ships. The result was a defensive pattern that adapted continuously to changing threat conditions, concentrating fire where it was most needed while maintaining coverage against potential follow-up attacks. Morrison observed this coordination from the Hornet's Combat Information Center, watching as radar displays showed the systematic destruction of attacking formations. The mechanical precision of automated weapons created defensive patterns that human operators could never have achieved. Aircraft approaching from multiple directions encountered fire from ships they couldn't see, guided by radar systems that maintained continuous tracking despite smoke, weather, and electronic countermeasures. The effectiveness measurements exceeded all previous standards. Task Force 58's ships shot down over 300 Japanese aircraft during the two-day battle while sustaining minimal damage themselves. The few successful kamikaze hits occurred against vessels not yet equipped with automated fire control, highlighting the system's decisive impact on combat outcomes. Ships carrying Morrison's equipment achieved defensive success rates approaching 90%, performance levels that rendered sustained kamikaze operations strategically impossible. The broader implications became apparent as Operation Iceberg continued through the spring and summer of 1945. Japanese forces, discovering that their primary tactical advantage had been neutralized by American technological innovation, struggled to develop alternative approaches that might restore the effectiveness of suicide attacks. Subsequent kamikaze operations achieved progressively lower success rates as more American ships received automated defensive systems. The production miracle that supported this technological transformation reflected American industrial capacity at its absolute peak. Factories throughout the United States manufactured fire control components with precision that would have been impossible just years earlier. The complex servo motors, sophisticated electronic circuits, and precision mechanical assemblies required manufacturing techniques that pushed existing capabilities to their limits. Yet production lines met delivery schedules that supported the Navy's ambitious installation timeline across hundreds of vessels. Quality control standards exceeded anything previously achieved in military procurement. Each fire control system underwent extensive testing before shipment, with rejection rates that reflected the critical importance of reliable performance under combat conditions. The components that reached fleet units represented manufacturing excellence that would have been considered impossible during peacetime operations. Training programs evolved to support the expanding deployment of automated systems. Naval technical schools developed comprehensive curricula that prepared maintenance personnel for equipment complexity far exceeding traditional mechanical systems. The programs combined theoretical electronics instruction with hands-on experience using actual fire control components, ensuring that fleet personnel possessed the knowledge necessary to maintain peak system performance under operational conditions. Morrison's role expanded beyond technical development to encompass training and operational support throughout the Pacific Fleet. His expertise remained unique, despite the growing number of personnel qualified to operate and maintain the systems. Ships experiencing unusual problems specifically requested his assistance, knowing that the original developer possessed insights that no amount of technical documentation could convey. The mechanic's reputation within fleet circles reached legendary proportions, though his name remained classified information unavailable to enemy intelligence services. Officers who had witnessed his systems in combat spoke of their effectiveness in terms that bordered on reverence. The knowledge that American ships carried weapons capable of defeating any conceivable kamikaze attack restored confidence that had been eroding under the strain of facing suicidal enemies. The strategic impact extended far beyond individual battles to influence American planning for the final phases of the Pacific War. Operations that had seemed prohibitively risky due to expected kamikaze casualties became feasible with effective defensive systems available. The invasion of Japan itself, previously considered a potential catastrophe that might cost hundreds of thousands of American lives, appeared manageable with ships that could defend themselves against suicide attacks. Japanese recognition of this technological shift influenced their strategic thinking in ways that American intelligence was only beginning to understand. Enemy communications, intercepted and decoded by Allied cryptographers, revealed growing awareness that kamikaze tactics were no longer achieving acceptable success rates against American forces. The implications for Japanese morale and strategic planning were profound, though their full impact wouldn't become apparent until after the war's end. The summer of 1945 brought new challenges that tested Morrison's systems under different conditions. Japanese forces, recognizing that traditional kamikaze approaches were failing, began experimenting with modified tactics designed to exploit perceived vulnerabilities in automated defensive systems. These included approaches at extremely low altitudes where radar tracking might be degraded by sea return, high-speed diving attacks that might overstress servo-motor capabilities, and coordinated strikes timed to coincide with periods when American ships might be vulnerable due to mechanical failures or maintenance requirements. Each new enemy tactic required corresponding modifications to defensive procedures and equipment capabilities. Morrison worked with operational commanders to develop countermeasures that maintained system effectiveness despite evolving threats. The solutions often involved subtle changes to tracking algorithms or mechanical adjustments that optimized performance for specific engagement scenarios. The continuous improvement process demonstrated one of the system's greatest advantages over static defensive measures. Unlike fixed fortifications or weapons with inherent limitations, automated fire control could be modified and upgraded to meet changing tactical requirements. Software updates could be distributed throughout the fleet to counter new enemy techniques. Hardware modifications could be implemented during routine maintenance periods without compromising operational capabilities. This adaptability proved crucial, as Japanese desperation led to increasingly exotic attack methods. Suicide submarines, explosive-laden small boats, and even swimming demolition teams required defensive responses that traditional weapons couldn't provide. Morrison's fire control systems, originally designed for anti-aircraft defense, were modified to engage surface threats with effectiveness that surprised even their developer. The technical challenges of these modifications pushed system capabilities beyond their original design parameters. Engaging small, fast-moving surface targets required tracking algorithms optimized for different movement patterns than aircraft. The radar signatures of boats and submarines differed significantly from aerial targets, necessitating filter modifications that could distinguish genuine threats from false returns caused by waves or debris. Morrison approached each challenge with the systematic methodology that had characterized his original development work. Problems were analyzed to identify their fundamental technical requirements. Existing system capabilities were evaluated to determine what modifications might provide necessary performance improvements. Solutions were tested under controlled conditions before implementation aboard operational vessels. The results validated his approach to adaptive system design. Ships equipped with modified fire control systems successfully engaged enemy surface threats that would have penetrated traditional defensive screens. The USS Indianapolis, later famous for its tragic sinking, used automated guns to destroy several suicide boats during operations off Saipan. Similar successes occurred throughout the fleet as crews gained confidence in their equipment's versatility. The psychological transformation among American naval personnel reflected the broader impact of technological superiority on military morale. Sailors who had faced kamikaze attacks with barely controlled fear now possessed confidence in their defensive capabilities that bordered on arrogance. The knowledge that their ships carried weapon systems capable of defeating any conceivable enemy attack restored the offensive spirit that had characterized American naval operations during the war's early phases. This confidence influenced tactical decision-making at all levels of command. Admirals who had previously avoided operations that might expose their forces to concentrated kamikaze attacks now planned aggressive strikes deep into enemy-controlled waters. Ship captains who had maneuvered defensively to minimize exposure to suicide attackers resumed the bold tactical approaches that had proven so effective during earlier campaigns. The ripple effects extended throughout American strategy in the Pacific. Operations that had been postponed due to expected casualties from kamikaze attacks were rescheduled with confidence that losses would remain within acceptable limits. The planned invasion of Japan, designated Operation Downfall, received renewed support from naval commanders who now believed their forces could survive the expected aerial onslaught. Intelligence assessments confirmed that Japanese recognition of American defensive improvements was influencing enemied communications, revealed debates among strategic planning. Intercept Japanese military leaders about the continued viability of kamikaze tactics against American forces. Some commanders advocated for conventional defensive strategies that might preserve aircraft and pilots for more effective operations. The irony wasn't lost on Morrison as he observed these strategic shifts from his position aboard the Hornet. A rejected idea from a Navy mechanic had evolved into a technological advantage that was reshaping the entire Pacific War. The fire control systems that had begun as his personal crusade to solve a practical problem had become instrumental in defeating Japanese strategy at its most fundamental level. The transformation remained largely invisible to the American public, whose understanding of naval warfare focused on dramatic surface battles and carrier airstrikes, rather than the technical systems that made such operations possible. Press coverage of Pacific operations mentioned improved anti-aircraft defenses, but didn't identify the specific technologies responsible for enhanced effectiveness. Military censorship ensured that detailed information about fire control capabilities remained classified to prevent enemy countermeasures. This anonymity suited Morrison perfectly. His satisfaction came from watching his systems save American lives, rather than from public recognition of his contributions. The knowledge that every successful defensive engagement validated his original concept provided personal fulfillment that no amount of publicity could have enhanced. He had solved the problem he set out to address, transforming American naval capabilities in ways that would influence military technology for decades to come. The technical legacy of Morrison's innovation extended far beyond its immediate wartime applications. The principles of automated fire control that he had pioneered would evolve into the sophisticated defensive systems that protected naval vessels throughout the Cold War and beyond. Modern naval weapons systems traced their conceptual lineage directly to the radar-guided guns that had first proven their effectiveness in the skies over Okinawa. Engineering schools would eventually study Morrison's development methodology as an example of successful military innovation under extreme time pressure. The systematic approach he had used to transform an experimental concept into operational reality became a model for subsequent defense technology programs. His emphasis on incremental testing and continuous improvement established principles that guided military procurement for generations. The human dimension of technological warfare became apparent through Morrison's experience with Project Able. Individual innovation, supported by institutional resources and driven by operational necessity, could achieve results that formal research programs might never accomplish. The mechanic's practical knowledge of naval systems, combined with his insight into combat requirements, had produced solutions that purely theoretical approaches might have missed entirely. As summer 1945 progressed toward the war's dramatic conclusion, Morrison's fire control systems had become so thoroughly integrated into naval operations that their revolutionary nature was already being forgotten by those who used them daily. Young sailors assumed that automated defensive weapons had always been standard equipment. They couldn't imagine conducting anti-aircraft operations using the manual methods that had been universal just months earlier. This integration represented the ultimate success of any military innovation. Technology that transformed fundamental capabilities while becoming invisible to its users had achieved the highest possible effectiveness. Morrison systems had not only solved the immediate problem of kamikaze defense, but had done so in ways that seemed natural and inevitable to the personnel who operated them. The approaching end of the Pacific War would soon reveal the full strategic impact of automated fire control on Japanese decision-making. Enemy recognition that their primary tactical advantage had been neutralized by American technological innovation contributed to the growing realization that continued resistance was futile. The kamikaze threat that had seemed capable of making American victory prohibitively expensive had been effectively countered by a rejected idea from a Navy mechanic whose name remained unknown to history. The strategic implications of Morrison's achievement became starkly apparent on August 6, 1945, when the Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. As Emperor Hirohito's advisors gathered to assess Japan's increasingly desperate situation, classified reports from naval commanders painted a devastating picture of kamikaze ineffectiveness. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, chief of the Naval General Staff, presented casualty statistics that revealed the complete failure of Japan's primary defensive strategy. Over 2,800 kamikaze aircraft had been launched against American forces since October 1944. Yet American naval losses had declined dramatically rather than increased. The mathematics of defeat were undeniable. Japanese pilots were achieving hit rates below 5% against ships equipped with automated fire control, compared to success rates exceeding 20% during early kamikaze operations. More critically, successful hits were causing significantly less damage due to improved American damage control procedures and ship design modifications. The divine wind that was supposed to drive American invaders from Japanese waters had been reduced to a gentle breeze by technological innovation. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, the architect of kamikaze tactics, acknowledged this reality in his final meeting with Emperor Hirohito on August 14, 1945. The Americans had achieved what Japanese strategists had believed impossible: effective defense against pilots willing to die for single attacks. The spiritual superiority that was supposed to overcome material disadvantages had been systematically neutralized by radar-guided guns that never tired, never hesitated, and never missed due to human limitations. Morrison learned of Japan's surrender while aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, where Admiral Nimitz was preparing for the formal surrender ceremony. The mechanic stood among thousands of American sailors watching as representatives of the Japanese government signed documents ending the most destructive conflict in human history. Few observers understood that the war's outcome had been significantly influenced by a rejected idea that had evolved into America's most effective defensive technology. The Missouri's fire control systems, installed just months earlier, represented the culmination of Morrison's development work. The battleship's massive 16-inch guns could be directed by the same radar technology that guided anti-aircraft weapons, enabling precision bombardment at ranges that human observers couldn't achieve. The integration of all weapon systems under automated control had transformed the vessel into a floating fortress capable of engaging any conceivable threat with mechanical precision. Captain William Callahan, the Missouri's commanding officer, had witnessed the evolution of naval gunnery from his early days as a junior officer aboard World War I dreadnoughts. The transformation from manual gun-laying to radar-directed fire represented a technological leap comparable to the transition from sail to steam power. Ships equipped with automated systems possessed advantages over manually operated vessels that rendered traditional naval tactics obsolete. The surrender ceremony itself demonstrated American technological superiority in ways that Japanese observers couldn't ignore. Electronic equipment aboard the Missouri recorded every word spoken during the proceedings, transmitting live coverage to radio stations throughout the United States. Radar systems maintained continuous surveillance of Tokyo Bay, tracking every vessel and aircraft within 50 miles of the anchorage. Most significantly, the battleship's fire control systems remained operational throughout the ceremony, capable of engaging any threat that might emerge despite the formal end of hostilities. General Douglas MacArthur, accepting Japan's surrender as Supreme Commander of Allied forces, understood the broader implications of technological warfare that extended far beyond individual weapon systems. The atomic bombs that had forced Japan's capitulation represented the ultimate expression of scientific innovation applied to military objectives. But conventional technologies like Morrison's fire control systems had been equally decisive in their own sphere, neutralizing enemy capabilities while preserving American forces for continued operations. The post-war analysis of Pacific naval operations revealed the full extent of automated fire control's impact on combat effectiveness. Statistical studies conducted by the Navy's Operational Research Group confirmed that ships equipped with Morrison systems had achieved defensive success rates exceeding 90% against all forms of aerial attack. More significantly, ammunition consumption per target destroyed had decreased by over 60% compared to manual systems, demonstrating both accuracy and efficiency improvements. These performance improvements had strategic implications that extended beyond immediate combat effectiveness. American naval operations in 1945 had been sustained by logistical systems that delivered ammunition, fuel, and spare parts across thousands of miles of ocean. The reduced ammunition consumption achieved by automated fire control had eased supply chain pressures that might otherwise have constrained operational tempo during the war's final phases. Captain Morrison, promoted in recognition of his contributions to naval technology, found himself assigned to the Navy's Bureau of Ships as the war's end approached. His new responsibilities included overseeing the transition from wartime emergency production to peacetime development programs. The challenge involved maintaining technological momentum while adapting to reduced budgets and different strategic priorities. The Korean War, beginning in June 1950, provided the first major test of Morrison systems under post-World War II conditions. American naval forces operating off the Korean coast faced different threats than Pacific War kamikazes, but the fundamental principles of automated fire control proved equally applicable. North Korean and Chinese aircraft, while not suicidal, presented targets that radar-guided weapons engaged with devastating effectiveness. The USS Rochester, a heavy cruiser equipped with the latest fire control systems, demonstrated capabilities that would have seemed impossible during World War II. The ship's 8-inch guns, directed by radar data processed through electronic computers, could engage targets beyond visual range with accuracy that approached artillery precision. Shore bombardment missions that previously required multiple ships could be accomplished by single vessels whose automated systems eliminated human error from targeting calculations. Commander James Patterson, the Rochester's gunnery officer, had served aboard destroyers during the Pacific War, where he had witnessed the evolution from manual to automated fire control. The transformation in naval gunnery capabilities during his career exceeded anything that previous generations of naval officers had experienced. Ships he now commanded possessed firepower that would have required entire squadrons just a decade earlier. The technological advancement continued throughout the 1950s as electronic computers became more sophisticated and reliable. Morrison's original concept of direct radar-to-gun control evolved into integrated combat systems that managed all aspects of naval warfare from detection through engagement. Ships equipped with these advanced systems could simultaneously track hundreds of targets while engaging dozens with precision that human operators could never achieve. The development of guided missiles in the late 1950s represented the logical extension of Morrison's automated fire control principles. Instead of directing guns to fire unguided projectiles, radar systems could now control self-guided weapons that pursued targets with relentless mechanical determination. The missiles themselves became extensions of the ship's fire control system, carrying sensors and computers that maintained target tracking throughout their flight. Admiral R. Lee Burke, Chief of Naval Operations during the late 1950s, recognized that naval warfare had been permanently transformed by the technologies pioneered during World War II. Future conflicts would be decided by the quality of electronic systems, rather than the number of guns or thickness of armor. The Navy's investment in automated fire control had established technological superiority that would influence maritime operations for decades. Morrison's personal involvement in these developments gradually decreased as younger engineers assumed responsibility for advancing technologies he had pioneered. His role evolved from hands-on development to strategic planning and system integration across multiple platforms. The mechanic who had once worked alone in Norfolk's repair shops now supervised teams of specialists developing weapon systems for ships that existed only as blueprints. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962 demonstrated the strategic importance of naval fire control systems in Cold War confrontations. American destroyers equipped with automated weapons maintained continuous tracking of Soviet vessels while prepared to engage targets at ranges and speeds that would have been impossible using manual systems. The precision and reliability of radar-guided weapons provided American commanders with confidence that their forces could prevail in any naval engagement. The integration of nuclear weapons into naval fire control systems during the 1960s represented the ultimate expression of automated warfare capabilities. Ships could now deliver weapons with destructive power measured in megatons rather than pounds, guided by electronic systems that ensured accuracy regardless of range or weather conditions. The technological leap from Morrison's original anti-aircraft guns to nuclear-armed missiles reflected the exponential pace of military innovation during the Cold War era. Morrison's retirement from active duty in 1965 coincided with the Navy's deployment of the first Aegis combat system, a direct descendant of the fire control technology he had pioneered 20 years earlier. The system's ability to simultaneously track and engage multiple targets represented the fulfillment of capabilities that had seemed impossible when he first proposed automated gun control. His original concept had evolved into the foundation of modern naval warfare. The Vietnam War provided additional validation of automated fire control principles under different operational conditions. American naval forces conducting river operations in the Mekong Delta used radar-guided weapons to engage targets in dense jungle environments where visual identification was impossible. The system's ability to distinguish between enemy combatants and civilian populations based on electronic signatures rather than visual assessment reduced casualties while maintaining operational effectiveness. Technology transfer programs during the 1960s and 1970s exported American fire control systems to Allied navies throughout the world. Ships of the Royal Navy, Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, and NATO allies received equipment based on Morrison's original designs. The global proliferation of automated naval weapons established American technological standards as the international baseline for maritime defense capabilities. The development of computer-controlled combat systems during the 1980s represented the complete integration of all ship functions under automated control. Vessels equipped with these systems could operate with reduced crews while maintaining capabilities that exceeded anything achieved during World War II. The mechanical precision that Morrison had sought for individual gun mounts had been extended to encompass entire ship operations, from navigation through weapons engagement. Modern naval warfare, conducted with weapon systems that trace their conceptual origins to Morrison's rejected proposal, demonstrates the long-term impact of individual innovation on military technology. Ships equipped with contemporary fire control systems engage targets at ranges measured in hundreds of miles, using weapons guided by satellites and controlled by computers that process information faster than human operators could comprehend. The stealth technology that characterizes modern naval vessels reflects lessons learned from Morrison's emphasis on system integration and electronic coordination. Ships designed to minimize radar signatures while maximizing their own sensor capabilities represent the evolution of concepts he pioneered when linking detection systems directly to weapon control. The invisible advantage of superior electronics continues to determine naval superiority just as it did during World War II. Training programs for contemporary naval personnel emphasize the same principles Morrison discovered through practical experience. Successful operation of complex systems requires understanding both individual components and their integration into larger operational concepts. Modern sailors learn electronic systems theory alongside traditional seamanship, recognizing that technological proficiency has become as essential as navigation skills. The cyber warfare capabilities of modern naval forces extend Morrison's concept of automated systems into domains he never imagined. Ships can now engage enemy forces through electronic attacks that disable opposing systems without firing physical weapons. The principle of using technological superiority to neutralize enemy capabilities, regardless of their willingness to accept casualties, remains as relevant today as it was against kamikaze attacks. International naval exercises during the 21st century consistently demonstrate the decisive advantage provided by superior fire control systems. Fleets equipped with automated weapons routinely defeat larger forces using manual systems, validating Morrison's original insight that mechanical precision could overcome numerical disadvantages. The lessons learned from his wartime innovation continue to influence naval doctrine worldwide. The privatization of military technology development during recent decades has created opportunities for innovation that echo Morrison's original approach to solving practical problems. Defense contractors now employ thousands of engineers whose work builds upon principles he established when linking radar systems to gun control. The entrepreneurial spirit that drove his individual innovation has been institutionalized within the military-industrial complex. Contemporary threats from anti-ship missiles, drone swarms, and hypersonic weapons require defensive capabilities that extend Morrison's automated fire control concepts to their logical conclusion. Ships must now engage targets moving at speeds that make human intervention impossible, relying entirely on electronic systems to detect, track, and destroy threats within seconds of their appearance. The mechanical precision he pioneered has evolved into electronic reflexes measured in milliseconds, i.e., the Space Force's development of orbital weapons platforms represents the ultimate extension of Morrison's fire control principles beyond Earth's atmosphere. Satellites equipped with automated defensive systems protect American space assets using technologies descended from his original radar-to-gun integration. The same concepts that defended ships against kamikaze attacks now protect orbital infrastructure against ballistic missiles and anti-satellite weapons. Educational institutions worldwide study Morrison's development methodology as an example of successful military innovation under extreme pressure. Engineering programs analyze his systematic approach to problem-solving, emphasizing the importance of practical experience in identifying solutions that theoretical approaches might overlook. His emphasis on incremental testing and continuous improvement has become standard practice in defense technology development. The declassification of Project Able documents during the 1990s finally revealed Morrison's central role in developing automated fire control technology. Military historians studying the Pacific War's technological dimensions recognized that his innovation had been as decisive as radar, sonar, or code breaking in determining the conflict's outcome. The mechanic whose name had remained classified for 50 years was finally acknowledged as one of World War II's most influential innovators. Veterans organizations honored Morrison's contributions during ceremonies marking the war's 60th anniversary in 2005. Survivors of ships that had been saved by automated fire control systems paid tribute to the man whose rejected idea had evolved into their salvation. The recognition, while long overdue, validated his belief that individual innovation could make decisive contributions to national defense. The technological revolution that Morrison initiated with his original proposal continues to accelerate as artificial intelligence and quantum computing create possibilities that exceed anything he could have envisioned. Modern naval weapon systems process information and make targeting decisions with capabilities that approach science fiction. Yet they operate according to principles he established when first connecting radar displays to gun mounts. Defense industry analysis projects that future naval warfare will be conducted entirely by automated systems capable of engaging thousands of simultaneous targets across multiple domains. The human operators who once manually tracked aircraft will be replaced by artificial intelligence systems that can process sensor data from across the electromagnetic spectrum while coordinating defensive responses at the speed of light. Morrison's vision of mechanical precision overcoming human limitations will reach its ultimate expression in weapon systems that operate beyond human comprehension. The legacy of Morrison's innovation extends beyond military applications to influence civilian technologies that benefit millions of people worldwide. Automated systems in commercial aviation, automotive safety, and industrial manufacturing all trace conceptual origins to his work linking sensors directly to control systems. The principle of using electronic integration to enhance human capabilities has become fundamental to modern technological society. Research institutions continue developing technologies based on Morrison's systematic approach to solving complex problems through incremental innovation. His methodology of identifying practical requirements, developing solutions through testing, and implementing improvements based on operational experience has become the standard model for engineering development across multiple industries. The rejected idea that saved America's fleet continues to influence technological progress 75 years after its conception. The story of Morrison's triumph over institutional resistance provides inspiration for contemporary innovators facing similar challenges. His persistence in promoting concepts that bureaucratic systems initially rejected demonstrates the importance of individual vision in driving technological progress. The transformation of his personal crusade into America's most effective naval defense system proves that revolutionary innovations can emerge from unexpected sources when supported by systematic development and practical testing. Military academies worldwide study Morrison's career as an example of how individual initiative can influence strategic outcomes. His progression from ship's mechanic to naval technology pioneer illustrates the potential for practical experience to generate innovations that formal research might never achieve. Contemporary officers learned that the next decisive military technology might originate from any member of their organization who possesses the insight to recognize problems and the determination to develop solutions. The international implications of Morrison's achievement continue to shape naval competition between major powers. Nations investing in automated defensive systems based on his principles maintain decisive advantages over those relying on manual systems, creating technological gaps that influence diplomatic and military relationships. The fire control revolution he initiated remains a primary factor in determining naval superiority among world's major maritime forces. As artificial intelligence and autonomous systems become increasingly sophisticated, Morrison's original insight about the superiority of mechanical precision over human limitations gains renewed relevance. Future weapon systems will operate according to principles he established, while exceeding his wildest imagination in their capabilities and applications. The rejected idea that saved America's Pacific Fleet continues to evolve toward technologies that will define warfare for generations to come. The transformation of naval warfare that began with Morrison's innovative fire control systems represents one of military history's most significant technological revolutions. His achievement demonstrates how individual insight, supported by systematic development and institutional resources, can create capabilities that fundamentally alter the balance of power between opposing forces. The mechanic, whose name remained unknown for decades, had authored changes that influenced the course of world history through the simple act of connecting radar screens to gun mounts with unprecedented precision and reliability. The transformation Morrison had unleashed rippled through naval warfare with consequences that extended far beyond the immediate tactical advantages. By late 1945, as American forces occupied Japan and established military governments across the Pacific, the full strategic implications of automated fire control became apparent through captured Japanese documents and interrogations of enemy commanders. What American intelligence discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about how technological superiority influenced military decision-making at the highest levels of government. Admiral Soemu Toyoda's private correspondence, seized from the Japanese Naval Ministry, revealed the profound psychological impact of America's defensive revolution on enemy strategic planning. Writing to Emperor Hirohito in July 1945, Toyoda described watching carefully planned kamikaze operations fail against American ships with success rates that made continued attacks militarily meaningless. The divine wind that was supposed to drive invaders from Japanese waters had been systematically neutralized by technologies that Japanese engineers couldn't replicate or counter. The captured documents painted a devastating picture of Japanese technical desperation during the war's final months. Enemy scientists had recognized the principles behind American fire control systems through battlefield observation and prisoner interrogations, but lacked the industrial capacity to develop comparable equipment. Japanese factories, already strained beyond capacity by conventional weapons production, couldn't manufacture the precision components required for automated gun control. More critically, they lacked the advanced radar technology that made such systems possible. Colonel Hideki Tojo's technical assessment, found among his personal papers after his arrest as a war criminal, acknowledged that Japan had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of industrial warfare. While Japanese strategy emphasized spiritual superiority and tactical innovation, American success reflected systematic application of scientific principles to military problems. The automated defensive systems that defeated kamikaze attacks represented a methodical approach to technological development that Japanese culture couldn't match, despite individual brilliance among their engineers and scientists. This recognition extended beyond military circles to influence Japanese post-war reconstruction efforts. Industrial leaders studying American manufacturing techniques discovered that automated fire control represented just one example of systematic technological integration that characterized American production methods. The same principles that connected radar systems to gun mounts were applied to factory automation, quality control, and logistics management throughout American industry. Honda Soichiro, founder of the automotive company bearing his name, later credited his study of American naval technology with inspiring his approach to manufacturing innovation. The precision engineering required for Morrison's fire control systems demonstrated quality standards that Japanese industry had never achieved. Honda's determination to match and exceed American technological capabilities drove innovations that would eventually transform global automotive manufacturing during the 1960s and 1970s. The technological transfer extended beyond former enemies to allied nations seeking to modernize their naval forces. Britain's Royal Navy, despite its proud traditions and extensive wartime experience, recognized that American fire control systems offered capabilities that British technology couldn't match. The Admiralty's decision to adopt American equipment for new construction reflected acknowledgement that technological superiority transcended national pride or historical precedent. Captain Lord Lua Mountbatten, later First Sea Lord, witnessed demonstrations of American automated systems during his wartime visits to Pacific Fleet units. His reports to the British Admiralty emphasized not just the immediate tactical advantages, but the broader implications for naval warfare's future evolution. Ships equipped with such systems would dominate those relying on manual methods, regardless of crew quality or tactical doctrine. The French Navy's reconstruction after liberation revealed similar recognition of American technological leadership. Admiral Georges Thierry d'Argentlieu, commanding Free French naval forces, had observed American fire control effectiveness during joint operations in the Pacific. His post-war recommendations emphasized the necessity of adopting American technologies if French naval forces hoped to remain relevant in modern warfare. These international adoptions created standardization pressures that further entrenched American technological dominance. Allied navies using American equipment required American training, American spare parts, and American technical support. The proliferation of Morrison's fire control systems established technological dependencies that influenced diplomatic and military relationships for decades beyond the war's end. The Soviet Union's response to American naval technological superiority followed different patterns reflecting their political system's unique characteristics. Soviet naval intelligence had gathered extensive information about American fire control systems through espionage networks and technical analysis of captured equipment. However, their attempts to replicate these capabilities faced obstacles that went beyond mere technical challenges. Stalin's paranoia about Western technology created bureaucratic barriers that delayed Soviet development of comparable systems. Engineers who proposed copying American designs faced suspicion about their loyalty and motivations. The centralized planning system that governed Soviet industry struggled to coordinate the complex manufacturing requirements for sophisticated electronic equipment. Most critically, Soviet emphasis on heavy industry and military production left civilian electronics development far behind American standards. Admiral Nikolai Kuznetsov, commanding the Soviet Navy during the late 1940s, understood his force's technological disadvantages, but lacked the political influence to overcome systemic obstacles to innovation. His classified reports to the Politburo described American naval capabilities in terms that bordered on desperation, acknowledging that Soviet vessels couldn't survive engagements with ships equipped with automated defensive systems. The Cold War arms race that emerged from these technological disparities drove both superpowers to invest enormous resources in naval development programs. American advantages in fire control technology provided the foundation for broader superiority in electronic warfare, guided missiles, and integrated combat systems. Soviet attempts to achieve parity required massive investments that strained their economy while never fully closing the technological gap that Morrison's innovation had created. The Korean War's outbreak in June 1950 provided the first major test of post-World War II naval technologies under combat conditions. American ships operating off the Korean coast faced different threats than Pacific War kamikazes. But the fundamental principles of automated fire control proved equally applicable against North Korean and Chinese aircraft. The war's naval engagements demonstrated that technological advantages gained during World War II remained decisive under changed strategic circumstances. The USS Missouri's bombardment of North Korean positions near Wonsan in October 1950 showcased capabilities that exceeded anything achieved during World War II. The battleship's 16-inch guns, directed by radar systems integrated with ballistic computers, could engage targets beyond visual range with accuracy that approached artillery precision. Shore positions that would have required multiple ships and extended bombardments during World War II were destroyed by single vessels whose automated systems eliminated human error from targeting calculations. Captain William Callahan, still commanding the Missouri 5 years after accepting Japan's surrender, marveled at the evolution in naval gunnery capabilities during his career. Ships he now commanded possessed firepower that would have required entire squadrons during his early service aboard World War I dreadnoughts. The transformation from manual gun-laying to automated fire control represented a technological leap comparable to the transition from sail to steam power. The integration of early computers into naval fire control systems during the 1950s represented the logical extension of Morrison's original concept. Instead of simple mechanical linkages between radar displays and gun mounts, ships began receiving electronic systems that processed multiple sensor inputs while calculating optimal engagement solutions for complex tactical situations. The mechanical precision that Morrison had achieved through servo motors evolved into computational precision that could consider variables beyond human comprehension. The USS Salem, a heavy cruiser commissioned in 1949, became the testbed for computer-controlled fire control systems that would define naval warfare throughout the Cold War era. The ship's Mark 8 fire control radar, connected to an early electronic computer, could simultaneously track dozens of targets while calculating engagement priorities based on threat assessment algorithms. The system represented a quantum leap beyond Morrison's original manual radar-to-gun connections, yet operated according to principles he had established. Commander Robert Hayes, the Salem's gunnery officer, had served aboard destroyers during World War II, where he witnessed the evolution from manual to automated fire control. The progression from Morrison's mechanical systems to computer-controlled weapons exceeded anything that previous generations of naval officers had experienced. Ships equipped with electronic fire control could engage multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining accuracy that human operators could never achieve. The development of guided missiles during the 1950s represented the ultimate expression of automated fire control principles. Instead of directing guns to fire unguided projectiles, radar systems could now control self-guided weapons that pursued targets with mechanical determination. The Terrier and Talos missiles that entered service during this period carried their own sensors and guidance systems, extending the ship's fire control capability far beyond gun range. Admiral R. Lee Burke, Chief of Naval Operations during the missile transition, recognized that naval warfare had been permanently transformed by technologies pioneered during World War II. Future conflicts would be decided by electronic systems rather than traditional gunnery. But the fundamental principles remained unchanged. Ships equipped with superior fire control would defeat those relying on manual methods, regardless of other technological factors. The integration of nuclear weapons into naval fire control systems during the 1960s represented both the culmination and transformation of Morrison's original concept. Ships could now deliver weapons with destructive power, measured in megatons rather than pounds, guided by electronic systems that ensured accuracy regardless of range or weather conditions. The technological progression from anti-aircraft guns to nuclear-armed missiles reflected the exponential pace of military innovation during the Cold War era. Morrison's personal involvement in these developments gradually transitioned from hands-on engineering to strategic planning and system integration. His role evolved to encompass oversight of technologies that built upon principles he had established, but now required teams of specialists to develop and implement. The rejected idea that had begun with a single mechanic's insight now influenced defense contractors employing thousands of engineers across multiple disciplines. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962 demonstrated the strategic importance of naval fire control systems in Cold War confrontations short of actual warfare. American destroyers maintaining the quarantine around Cuba used automated tracking systems to monitor Soviet vessels while prepared to engage targets if hostilities erupted. The precision and reliability of these systems provided American commanders with confidence that their forces could prevail in any naval engagement, despite being outnumbered by Soviet submarines in the Caribbean. The crisis revealed how technological advantages gained through Morrison's innovation influenced diplomatic calculations during international confrontations. Soviet leaders understood that their naval forces couldn't match American fire control capabilities in direct engagements, constraining their options for escalating the crisis through military action. The invisible advantage of superior electronics continued to determine naval superiority just as it had against kamikaze attacks 20 years earlier. The Vietnam War provided additional validation of automated fire control principles under different operational conditions than envisioned. American, those Morrison had originally naval forces conducting river operations in the Mekong Delta, used radar-guided weapons to engage targets in dense jungle environments where visual identification was impossible. The system's ability to distinguish between enemy combatants and civilian populations based on electronic signatures rather than visual assessment reduced casualties while maintaining operational effectiveness. The USS New Jersey's return to active service in 1968 demonstrated how World War II-era ships could be modernized with contemporary fire control systems to meet evolving operational requirements. The battleship's 16-inch guns, originally controlled by mechanical computers from the 1940s, received electronic upgrades that enabled precision bombardment of targets identified by forward observers or aircraft. The combination of massive firepower with contemporary accuracy created capabilities that exceeded anything available to ground forces. Captain Edward Snyder, commanding the New Jersey during her Vietnam deployment, understood that his ship's effectiveness resulted from technological evolution spanning 3 decades. The automated fire control systems that directed the battleship's guns traced their conceptual origins to Morrison's original proposal. but now incorporated advances in electronics, computers, and sensors that multiplied their capabilities exponentially. The rejected idea had become the foundation for weapon systems that shaped American military strategy worldwide. Technology transfer programs during the 1960s and 1970s exported American fire control systems to Allied navies throughout the world, creating standardization that further entrenched technological dependencies established during World War II. Ships of NATO allies received equipment based on Morrison's principles, ensuring interoperability during joint operations while maintaining American technological leadership. The global proliferation of automated naval weapons established American standards as the international baseline for maritime defense capabilities. The development of the Aegis combat system during the 1970s represented the complete integration of Morrison's fire control concepts with contemporary computer technology. Ships equipped with Aegis could simultaneously track hundreds of targets while engaging dozens with precision that exceeded human comprehension. The system's ability to coordinate defensive responses across multiple ships created fleet-wide capabilities that transformed naval warfare from individual ship actions to integrated network operations. Admiral Elmo Zumwalt, Chief of Naval Operations during the Aegis development period, recognized that the system represented the fulfillment of capabilities that visionaries like Morrison had imagined decades earlier. The mechanical precision of automated gun control had evolved into electronic coordination of entire battle groups, creating defensive capabilities that could defeat any conceivable threat through technological superiority rather than numerical advantage. The Falklands War in 1982 provided the first major combat test of contemporary naval fire control systems descended from Morrison's innovation. British ships, equipped with automated defensive systems, successfully engaged Argentine aircraft using missiles guided by radar systems that operated according to principles he had established. The conflict demonstrated that technological advantages remained decisive in naval warfare, despite changes in weapons, tactics, and strategic circumstances. HMS Sheffield's loss to an Exocet missile revealed both the capabilities and limitations of automated defensive systems under modern combat conditions. The ship's fire control systems detected the incoming missile, but couldn't engage it due to electronic warfare countermeasures that confused the tracking radar. The incident highlighted the continuing evolution of naval warfare as new technologies created fresh challenges for defensive systems based on established principles. The integration of satellite navigation and communication systems during the 1980s extended Morrison's fire control concepts beyond individual ships to encompass global naval operations. Vessels anywhere in the world could now receive targeting data from space-based sensors while coordinating their defensive responses through satellite communication networks. The automation that had begun with direct connections between radar and guns evolved into worldwide coordination of naval forces through electronic integration. The Persian Gulf conflicts of the 1980s and 1990s demonstrated how automated fire control systems had become essential for naval operations in confined waters, where threats could emerge from multiple directions simultaneously. American ships conducting convoy escort duties used computer-controlled weapons to engage Iranian aircraft, fast boats, and mines while maintaining defensive coverage that manual systems could never achieve. The technological advantages that Morrison's innovation had provided against kamikaze attacks proved equally decisive against different threats in changed circumstances. The USS Vincennes incident in July 1988, where automated systems mistakenly identified an Iranian airliner as a hostile aircraft, revealed both the capabilities and responsibilities that accompanied technological superiority in naval warfare. The ship's Aegis combat system had functioned exactly as designed, detecting and engaging what its electronic sensors identified as a threat. The tragedy highlighted how human judgment remained essential even in highly automated systems, echoing challenges that Morrison had recognized during his original development work. The end of the Cold War in 1991 created opportunities for unprecedented cooperation between former adversaries in naval technology development. Russian engineers, freed from political constraints that had limited their access to Western innovations, studied American fire control systems with professional admiration for achievements they had been unable to match despite decades of effort. The technological gap that Morrison's innovation had created remained unbridged, even after nearly 50 years of Soviet attempts to achieve parity. The Gulf War's naval operations demonstrated how automated fire control systems had evolved to encompass entire operational theaters rather than individual ship defense. American vessels coordinated their activities through satellite networks that provided real-time targeting data while maintaining defensive coverage across thousands of square miles of ocean. The precision and coordination achieved through electronic integration exceeded anything that human operators could have managed using manual systems. Morrison's retirement from active duty in 1965 had coincided with the Navy's recognition that automated systems represented the future of naval warfare. But his influence continued through the engineers and officers who had worked with him throughout his career. The principles he had established during Project Able became fundamental doctrine, taught at naval academies and technical schools worldwide. His emphasis on systematic development, practical testing, and continuous improvement became standard methodology for military innovation across all services. The declassification of Project Able documents during the 1990s finally revealed Morrison's central role in developing technologies that had shaped naval warfare for half a century. Military historians studying the Pacific War's technological dimensions recognized that his innovation had been as decisive as radar, sonar, or cryptography in determining the conflict's outcome. The mechanic whose contributions had remained classified for security reasons was finally acknowledged as one of World War II's most influential figures. Contemporary naval warfare, conducted with weapons systems that trace their origins to Morrison's rejected proposal, operates according to principles he established while exceeding his wildest imagination in capabilities and applications. Modern ships engage targets at ranges measured in hundreds of miles, using weapons guided by satellites and controlled by computers that process information faster than human operators could comprehend. The mechanical precision he sought for individual gun mounts has evolved into electronic coordination of global naval operations. The cyber warfare capabilities of 21st century naval forces represent the latest evolution of Morrison's concept that electronic systems could provide decisive advantages over human-operated equipment. Ships can now engage enemy forces through computer attacks that disable opposing systems without firing physical weapons, demonstrating how technological superiority continues to determine naval outcomes through methods that transcend traditional concepts of firepower and defense. International naval exercises consistently validate Morrison's original insight that automated systems provide decisive advantages over manual operations, regardless of crew quality or tactical doctrine. Fleets equipped with computer-controlled weapons routinely defeat larger forces using less sophisticated equipment, proving that technological superiority remains the primary factor in determining naval combat outcomes. The lesson he learned while watching American ships struggle against kamikaze attacks continues to influence naval strategy worldwide. The privatization of defense technology development during recent decades has created innovation environments that echo Morrison's original approach to solving practical problems through systematic engineering. Contemporary defense contractors employ methodologies he pioneered when developing fire control systems under extreme time pressure and resource constraints. His emphasis on incremental testing and continuous improvement has become standard practice throughout the military-industrial complex. Educational institutions worldwide study Morrison's development methodology as an example of successful innovation under adverse conditions. Engineering programs analyze his systematic approach to problem-solving, while emphasizing the importance of practical experience in identifying solutions that theoretical approaches might overlook. His progression from ship's mechanic to technological pioneer illustrates potential for individual insight to influence strategic outcomes when supported by institutional resources and systematic development. The story of Morrison's triumph over bureaucratic resistance continues to inspire contemporary innovators facing similar challenges in promoting revolutionary concepts through established institutions. His persistence in advocating ideas that formal channels had rejected demonstrates how individual vision can drive technological progress when combined with systematic development and practical demonstration. The transformation of his personal crusade into America's most effective naval defense system proves that revolutionary innovations can emerge from unexpected sources. As artificial intelligence and autonomous systems become increasingly sophisticated, Morrison's original insight about mechanical precision exceeding human limitations gains renewed relevance for contemporary military applications. Future weapon systems will operate according to principles he established, while incorporating capabilities that exceed his imagination in their scope and applications. The rejected idea that saved America's Pacific Fleet continues evolving toward technologies that will define warfare for generations yet to come. The legacy Morrison created through his innovative fire control systems extends far beyond their immediate military applications to influence civilian technologies that benefit millions of people worldwide. Automated systems in commercial aviation, automotive safety, and industrial manufacturing all trace conceptual origins to his work connecting sensors directly to control mechanisms. The principle of using electronic integration to enhance human capabilities has become fundamental to modern technological society. Research institutions continue developing technologies based on Morrison's systematic approach to solving complex problems through incremental innovation and practical testing. His methodology of identifying requirements, developing solutions through experimentation, and implementing improvements based on operational experience has become the standard model for engineering development across multiple industries. The rejected idea that revolutionized naval warfare continues influencing technological progress 75 years after its initial conception. Military academies worldwide study Morrison's career as demonstration of how individual initiative can influence strategic outcomes when supported by systematic development and institutional resources. His progression from enlisted mechanic to technological innovator illustrates potential for practical experience to generate solutions that formal research might never achieve. Contemporary officers learn that decisive military technologies can originate from any organizational level when individual insight combines with determination to solve practical problems. The international implications of Morrison's achievement continue shaping naval competition between major powers as nations invest in automated defensive systems based on principles he established. Countries maintaining technological advantages through superior fire control systems possess decisive capabilities over those relying on manual methods, creating power relationships that influence diplomatic and military interactions worldwide. The revolution he initiated remains a primary factor determining naval superiority among the world's maritime forces. The transformation of naval warfare that began with Morrison's rejected proposal represents one of military history's most significant technological revolutions, demonstrating how individual innovation can create capabilities that fundamentally alter the balance of power between opposing forces. His achievement proves that systematic development supported by institutional resources can transform practical insights into strategic advantages that influence the course of world events through seemingly simple innovations that connect existing technologies in revolutionary ways. The transformation Morrison had unleashed through his automated fire control systems would reach its ultimate expression in the final months of World War II, as American naval forces prepared for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. Intelligence estimates painted a terrifying picture of what awaited the invasion fleet. Japanese forces had concentrated over 10,000 aircraft in the home islands, with the majority designated for kamikaze missions against American vessels approaching Japanese beaches. The scale of planned suicide attacks dwarfed anything previously encountered, promising aerial onslaughts that could potentially sink hundreds of American ships and kill tens of thousands of sailors. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commanding Pacific Fleet operations from his Pearl Harbor headquarters, understood that traditional defensive measures would prove catastrophically inadequate against such overwhelming numbers. His staff's mathematical projections were brutally simple. If Japanese kamikaze units achieved even modest success rates against the invasion fleet, American losses would exceed the combined naval casualties of the entire Pacific War. The operation's feasibility depended entirely on defensive capabilities that could neutralize suicide attacks with unprecedented effectiveness. Morrison's fire control systems had evolved far beyond their original conception by summer 1945. The latest variants incorporated electronic computers that processed multiple radar inputs simultaneously while calculating optimal engagement solutions for complex tactical scenarios. Ships equipped with these advanced systems could track hundreds of targets while engaging dozens with mechanical precision that eliminated human error from defensive operations. The transformation from his original manually operated prototype to fully automated fleet defense represented one of the war's most dramatic technological leaps. The USS Enterprise, America's most famous aircraft carrier, received the most sophisticated fire control installation ever mounted aboard a naval vessel. The system integrated every defensive weapon from 5-inch guns to 20mm cannons under unified electronic control. Radar data flowed through electronic circuits that identified genuine threats among false returns, while predicting target movement patterns with mathematical precision. The carrier's defensive umbrella could engage aircraft approaching from any direction, while maintaining protective coverage throughout extended combat operations. Captain Matthias Gardner, commanding the Enterprise during her final wartime deployment, had witnessed the complete transformation of naval air defense during his career. Ships he now commanded possessed capabilities that would have seemed impossible when he first went to sea as a junior officer. The automated defensive systems could engage multiple aircraft simultaneously with accuracy rates that exceeded 90%, performance levels that human operators could never achieve, regardless of training or experience. The integration of proximity-fused ammunition with automated fire control created synergistic effects that multiplied defensive effectiveness exponentially. Traditional anti-aircraft shells required direct hits to destroy attacking aircraft, a difficult achievement against fast-moving targets executing evasive maneuvers. Proximity fuses detonated shells when they approached within lethal distance of targets, creating destruction patterns that compensated for minor tracking errors while ensuring consistent lethality. Morrison worked closely with ordnance specialists to optimize ammunition performance for automated systems. The mechanical precision of radar-guided guns enabled more efficient use of proximity-fused shells by maintaining accurate tracking throughout engagement sequences. Human gunners struggling to follow maneuvering targets often fired shells that exploded harmlessly when proximity fuses activated too far from intended targets. Automated systems maintained consistent aim that maximized the probability of shells detonating within lethal range of attacking aircraft. The psychological transformation among American naval personnel reflected growing confidence in defensive capabilities that bordered on invincibility. Sailors who had faced kamikaze attacks with barely controlled terror now possessed assurance that their ships could survive any conceivable aerial assault. The knowledge that automated systems would engage attacking aircraft with mechanical persistence that never wavered restored the offensive spirit that had characterized American naval operations during the war's early phases. This confidence influenced tactical planning throughout the Pacific Fleet. As commanders developed increasingly aggressive operational concepts that exploited technological advantages Morrison's innovation had provided. Admiral William Halsey, commanding the Third Fleet, proposed close support missions that would have been suicidal using manual defensive systems. Ships equipped with automated fire control could operate within range of enemy airfields while maintaining defensive effectiveness that neutralized retaliatory strikes. The strategic implications extended beyond immediate tactical advantages to reshape American planning for post-war naval operations. Technologies developed under wartime pressure would provide decisive advantages in future conflicts against any potential adversary. The Soviet Union, despite its massive land forces and growing nuclear capabilities, lacked naval technologies that could match American fire control systems. This technological gap would influence Cold War maritime strategy for decades following the war's conclusion. Japanese recognition of American defensive improvements was forcing fundamental changes in enemy strategy that intelligence analysts were only beginning to understand. Intercepted communications revealed debates among Japanese military leaders about the continued viability of kamikaze tactics against ships that destroyed attacking aircraft with mechanical efficiency. Some commanders advocated abandoning suicide attacks in favor of conventional defensive strategies that might preserve aircraft and pilots for more effective operations. The irony wasn't lost on Morrison as he observed these strategic transformations from his position aboard the USS Hornet. His rejected proposal had evolved into a technological revolution that was reshaping the entire Pacific War's final phase. The automated systems that had begun as his personal crusade to solve a practical problem were now instrumental in forcing Japanese strategic recalculations at the highest levels of enemy command. Manufacturing statistics reflected the system's strategic importance as American factories produced fire control equipment at rates that would have seemed impossible during the experimental phase. Precision components required manufacturing techniques that pushed industrial capabilities to their absolute limits. Yet production lines consistently met delivery schedules that supported the Navy's ambitious installation timeline across hundreds of vessels simultaneously. The Chrysler Corporation's tank arsenal in Detroit had been converted to manufacture servo motors for naval fire control systems, demonstrating American industry's remarkable adaptability under wartime pressure. Workers who had assembled automotive transmissions now produced mechanical components requiring tolerances measured in thousandths of inches. The transition from consumer goods to precision military equipment illustrated the industrial flexibility that gave America decisive advantages over enemies constrained by rigid production systems. Quality control standards exceeded anything previously achieved in military procurement, as each fire control system underwent extensive testing before shipment to fleet units. Rejection rates reflected the critical importance of reliable performance under combat conditions, with defective components returned to manufacturers for analysis and improvement. The rigorous testing protocols ensured that equipment reaching operational vessels met specifications that guaranteed consistent performance during life-or-death engagements. Training programs evolved to support the expanding deployment of automated systems as naval technical schools developed comprehensive curricula preparing maintenance personnel for equipment, complexity far exceeding traditional mechanical systems. The programs combined theoretical electronics instruction with hands-on experience, using actual fire control components, ensuring fleet personnel possessed knowledge necessary to maintain peak system performance under operational conditions. Morrison's role expanded beyond technical development to encompass training and operational support throughout the Pacific Fleet, as his expertise remained unique despite growing numbers of personnel qualified to operate and maintain the systems. Ships experiencing unusual problems specifically requested his assistance, knowing that the original developer possessed insights that no amount of technical documentation could convey. The mechanic's reputation within fleet circles had reached legendary proportions, though his name remained classified information unavailable to enemy intelligence services. Officers who had witnessed his systems in combat spoke of their effectiveness in terms that bordered on reverence. The knowledge that American ships carried weapons capable of defeating any conceivable kamikaze attack had restored confidence that had been steadily eroding under the strain of facing suicidal enemies. The approaching climax of the Pacific War would soon test Morrison's innovation under conditions that exceeded anything previously encountered. As American forces prepared for the final assault on Japan, the automated fire control systems that had begun as one mechanic's rejected idea would prove decisive in determining whether the invasion could proceed despite expected casualties from the largest kamikaze offensive in military history. The summer of 1945 brought new challenges that tested Morrison's systems under operational conditions he had never anticipated. Japanese forces, recognizing that conventional kamikaze approaches were failing against automated defenses, began experimenting with modified tactics designed to exploit perceived vulnerabilities in radar-guided weapons. These included ultra-low altitude approaches where ground clutter might interfere with tracking systems, high-speed diving attacks intended to overwhelm servo-motor response times, and coordinated multi-directional strikes designed to saturate defensive capabilities. Each new enemy innovation required corresponding modifications to American defensive procedures and equipment capabilities. Morrison collaborated with fleet commanders to develop countermeasures that maintained system effectiveness despite evolving threats. The solutions often involved subtle algorithmic changes or mechanical adjustments that optimized performance for specific engagement scenarios, demonstrating the adaptability that distinguished automated systems from static defensive measures. The continuous improvement process validated Morrison's original design philosophy, emphasizing modular construction and systematic upgrading. Unlike fixed fortifications or weapons with inherent limitations, his fire control systems could be enhanced through software modifications and hardware improvements without compromising operational availability. This flexibility proved crucial as Japanese desperation led to increasingly exotic attack methods that traditional defensive systems couldn't counter effectively. Proximity sensors and electronic jamming equipment represented Japanese attempts to neutralize American technological advantages through countermeasures rather than superior performance. Enemy engineers had analyzed captured fire control components to understand system vulnerabilities, developing electronic interference devices intended to disrupt radar tracking during critical engagement phases. The countermeasures achieved limited success against early system variants, but proved ineffective against improved versions incorporating anti-jamming features. Morrison's systematic approach to technological development had anticipated such challenges through redundant systems and alternative operating modes. Fire control installations included backup tracking methods that could maintain defensive effectiveness even when primary radar systems experienced interference. The mechanical components possessed sufficient precision to engage targets using optical tracking when electronic systems were compromised, ensuring continuous defensive capability regardless of enemy countermeasures. The strategic bombing campaign against Japan during summer 1945 provided additional opportunities to test automated fire control systems against different target types than originally envisioned. B-29 formations conducting daylight raids over Japanese cities required defensive escort that challenged traditional fighter tactics. Automated defensive systems aboard accompanying vessels could engage enemy interceptors at ranges and with accuracy that manual systems couldn't achieve, extending protective coverage beyond conventional fighter capabilities. The integration of air-to-air missiles with automated fire control represented the logical extension of Morrison's original concept beyond shipboard applications. Aircraft equipped with radar-guided weapons could engage enemy fighters with mechanical precision that eliminated human reaction time from combat equations. Pilots who had struggled to achieve consistent accuracy using manual gun sights could now engage multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining defensive awareness throughout complex aerial engagements. These tactical advantages across all technological advances created synergistic effects that multiplied American combat domains. Ships, aircraft, and ground installations equipped with automated weapons could coordinate defensive responses through electronic communication networks that enabled unprecedented battlefield integration. The isolation that had characterized traditional military operations was being replaced by electronic connectivity that transformed individual platforms into components of larger weapon systems. The psychological impact on Japanese forces became apparent through prisoner interrogations and captured documents revealing enemy assessment of American capabilities. Japanese pilots reported encountering defensive fire patterns that seemed impossible using manual systems, with shells consistently detonating close enough to cause damage despite evasive maneuvers. The mechanical persistence of automated weapons created psychological pressure that degraded pilot performance, even when physical damage was minimal. Intelligence analysis revealed that Japanese recognition of American defensive superiority was influencing strategic planning at the highest levels of enemy command. Military leaders who had initially dismissed American technological capabilities as inferior to Japanese spiritual dedication now acknowledged that material advantages were overwhelming traditional tactical approaches. The implications for Japanese morale and continued resistance were profound, though their full impact wouldn't become apparent until after the war's conclusion. The atomic bombing of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, demonstrated American technological superiority in ways that transcended conventional military capabilities. But Morrison's fire control systems remained equally relevant for naval operations that would continue regardless of how the war ended. Ships equipped with automated defensive systems possessed capabilities that would influence post-war naval competition as surely as nuclear weapons would reshape strategic planning. Emperor Hirohito's decision to surrender following the atomic attacks prevented the massive kamikaze offensive that had been planned for Operation Downfall. But the defensive systems Morrison had developed would have proven their ultimate effectiveness had the invasion proceeded. Mathematical projections based on combat performance data indicated that automated fire control could have reduced expected naval casualties by over 70% compared to manual defensive systems. The surrender ceremony aboard the USS Missouri on September 2, 1945, represented not just the end of World War II, but the beginning of a new era in naval warfare, shaped by technologies Morrison had pioneered. The battleship's automated fire control systems remained operational throughout the proceedings, symbolizing American technological superiority that had contributed as much to victory as traditional military virtues of courage and determination. The transformation that Morrison had unleashed would reach its most profound expression not on any battlefield, but in the quiet laboratories and engineering schools of post-war America, where his rejected idea evolved into the foundation of modern naval warfare. By 1947, ASD to comprehend the world's struggle and the implications of nuclear weapons, Morrison's automated fire control principles were quietly revolutionizing military thinking in ways that would prove equally decisive for the emerging Cold War. The Korean conflict erupted just 5 years after Japan's surrender, providing the first major test of Morrison's legacy under completely different strategic circumstances. American destroyers patrolling off the Korean coast faced threats that bore no resemblance to Pacific War kamikazes. Yet the fundamental principles of automated engagement proved devastatingly effective against North Korean aircraft attempting conventional attacks. The USS Mansfield, equipped with the latest fire control systems, achieved kill rates exceeding 80% during night engagements where human gunners would have struggled to acquire targets at all. Captain Richard Walsh, commanding the Mansfield during her Korean deployment, understood that he was witnessing the maturation of concepts that had begun as desperate wartime expedients. The radar-guided guns that protected his ship represented not just technological advancement, but a fundamental shift in how naval warfare would be conducted for generations to come. Every successful engagement validated Morrison's original insight that mechanical precision could overcome human limitations when properly integrated with electronic detection capabilities. The Soviet response to American naval technological superiority revealed the broader strategic implications of Morrison's innovation. Admiral Sergei Gorshkov, architect of the post-war Soviet Navy, recognized that his forces faced technological disadvantages that couldn't be overcome through traditional approaches emphasizing numbers or tactical doctrine. Soviet attempts to develop comparable fire control systems encountered obstacles that went beyond mere engineering challenges to encompass fundamental differences in industrial organization and technological development philosophy. The centralized planning system that governed Soviet military production struggled to coordinate the complex manufacturing requirements for sophisticated electronic equipment. Party officials who controlled resource allocation possessed political credentials rather than technical expertise, creating bureaucratic barriers that delayed innovation while American systems continued advancing. Most critically, Soviet emphasis on heavy industry and conventional weapons left electronics development years behind American standards, achieved through private sector competition and military-industrial cooperation. These technological gaps influenced Soviet naval strategy throughout the Cold War, as Moscow sought asymmetric approaches that might neutralize American fire control advantages through unconventional tactics rather than direct competition. Submarine warfare, missile technology, and electronic countermeasures became Soviet priorities precisely because surface fleet engagement seemed hopeless against ships equipped with automated defensive systems descended from Morrison's original concept. The story of Eugene Morrison proves that the most decisive victories often come not from the loudest voices in the room, but from the quietest ones with the sharpest insights. A rejected idea from a Navy mechanic became the invisible shield that saved thousands of American lives and fundamentally altered the course of naval warfare forever. Sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with grand proclamations, but with one person refusing to accept that something can't be done.